Hello, 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 and welcome to the Loudcast with me, your host, Kevin McLean. I am still here, still in my flat in Leith, and still bringing you some of the very best of spoken word. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Loudcast, whether you're watching us on the video version on YouTube or whether you're listening on your favourite podcast platform. We appreciate you checking out the show. Make sure to do all that liking and rating, reviewing, all that good stuff. You have no idea how much it helps us and gets more people watching and listening, which is exactly what we're looking for. And we have an amazing show for you to check out this week, guys. It's going to be a good one. We have a wonderful guest in the way of Rab Florence, writer, director, comedian, all those good things. Also, poet, who knew? So stick around and we'll be chatting to Rab about his views on spoken word and poetry and how he kind of got involved and all of that. And we're going to be showing you, as always, some amazing poetry videos, and we're going to kick that off with the last guest from the Loudcast. That is Imogen Sterling, one of our absolute faves. If you haven't seen the episode with her yet, go and check it out. It is available. Go and see what she had to say. But for now, you can sit back and enjoy her wonderful poetry. This is Imogen Sterling with Glasgow.
Written retrospectively, on a hungover come-down megabus journey, because the years have taught me there's no other way to leave this city, Glasgow. My Glasgow. Well, hello again, you were a kick to the stomach, all right. On arrival, I anticipated the quiet before a midnight fist fight, because let's be honest, last time we did not have the kindest goodbye, but Glasgow, you're still looking so very fine now. OMG, oh my Glasgow. It's been days I've been so far from you, so why are your arms still home to me? Why this yin and yang unity? Why does bed with you come so naturally? When I broke my back trying to break your mold, trying to cast off your embrace, say face and forget you, Glasgow. Easier said than done, I suppose, because I ventured back and you dragged me back into the doldrums I evaded, reintroduced the addiction I didn't know I was craving, submerging me once again in that sweet, smoky haze of tedium, the one that always threatened mediocre consumption. But on this occasion, you shot the mundanity through with laser beams. You pulled the rug from underneath my feet for once I fought to match your pace as you dared me accuse you of complacency. And see, you were so quick to reveal the joys you once hinted at. Because Glasgow, you pushed boys at me with words and wit and voices. What choice do I have but to submit to you, Glasgow? You bluffer, you temptress, your hearers, new friends and old lovers, old friends and new lovers, Glasgow. What a well-constructed mess you stay. You will push me to the edge one day, but for now, I can't help but think you are class. You are class and utterly classless. You are totally fucked before it's even sunset. You're throwing up on your ex's carpet, waking up in a flat you don't remember coming back to, but Glasgow, your books and prints and the people who publish them, you are flasks of tea in autumnal gardens. Your old school vintage meets modern idiocy, paradoxical beauty steeped in inconsistency, Glasgow. You offered me the warmest welcome, but at your contrary expense of feeling lonesome, like there's always a catch. You're a need never sated. You'll present reconnection, but it comes with isolation. You are the champion of overthinking and imaginary demons overwrought but still thoughtless. And the hypocrisy is, if you thought less, you'd see that you are the waves of mixed signals in my sea of clarity. Yet Glasgow still, you're somehow spontaneity. You are great slams and shit gigs. You are pints of cider, overpriced wine, banana fuel, coffee. Glasgow, you're popping, you're cut into lines and powder bright. Why does nothing shine quite like the Queen's Park sunlight? You whisper temptations to me, possibilities of redemption and reconciliation. And Glasgow, in doing so, your accent is American, is Indian, Romanian. Glasgow, whose are you? Where are you? You hussy, you're not just mine, are you? No, Glasgow, you are hers, and you're his, and you draw us together until we are one. And my Glasgow's wine-muddled headache takes the hand of his Glasgow's 5 a.m. frosty start. My Glasgow sits spellbound at the speed of his Glasgow's bars. My, oh my Glasgow, where did he learn to write like that? Her Glasgow is all talk but lonely nights can't see. My Glasgow's lonely too sometimes. My Glasgow is selfish while his Glasgow's just getting by. Her Glasgow can't see when it's okay to cry. My Glasgow is chaos while his Glasgow oscillates. My Glasgow checks Facebook too often looking for his Glasgow's responses. Our Glasgow knows it can get away with too much because our Glasgow's a cunt, but our Glasgow's a good cunt. In fact, it's the best one. So Glasgow, I must confess that to love you any less would be to deny the Scottish storm in which we too are drenched. So do me a favour, contain your belligerence, Glasgow. If I give you a second chance, will you please this time be different? Thank you.
Imogen Sterling there with Glasgow. What a tremendous piece. Imogen is such a dynamic performer. If you checked out the last show, you'll know all about it. She is a multi-talented artist, and it shines through all of her work. Very, very happy to share that piece with you. And we have another excellent piece. This is something we shot slightly more recently during lockdown, and I thought it would be fun considering this series of the Loudcast is very graciously being sponsored or funded by the National Lottery through Creative Scotland. We figured we would share a poem with you from a time where we were slightly less funded. And this is Katie Ayles. This poem will be funded.
This poem has been developed from a unique, dynamic creative idea in a sustainable, effective manner into a poem. This poem is highly effective and efficient at being a poem. It both follows in the tradition of poetry and innovates in a unique manner, thus pushing the envelope and forging new paths. From the beginning of this poem, it was managed effectively by a highly skilled team of managers with extensive experience in efficiently managing poems. Their detailed CVs are attached to this poem. This poem is engaging the public in a way the public has never before engaged. This engagement is meaningful and sustainable and very unique. There will be many benefits to the public from this poem, not least of which is their engagement. This poem is very, very accessible. Its accessibility has been measured through you accessing it right now. This poem is equal and diverse. It has a policy for that. Also for the environment, for which this poem is good. Please be aware that this poem has been risk assessed and is an amber. Please remain cautious around this poem, but do be assured that this poem includes a 5% contingency in the event of unexpected reactions. Writing this poem has been significantly beneficial to the practice of writing poems in a positive, innovative, and sustainable manner. Its beneficial impact is both measurable and not measurable. But it is definitely engaging and incontrovertibly unique. Upon completion of this poem, please fill out the attached questionnaire measuring its beneficial public engagement and impact. You will be measured in the measuring of this poem.
Katie Ayles there with This Poem Will Be Funded, a very surreal piece, kind of unexpected from Katie. She is someone renowned for her, kind of imagery and her beautiful lyricism and this craft of words and assonance, and this is slightly more psychotic bureaucrat, but it fits, and it's good to have all those strings to your bows, and it's a good representation of someone we're going to be talking to later, Rab Florence, who is a filmmaker and a comedian and wears all these sort of different hats, and so I thought it would be a good example of someone stepping out of their comfort zone. And now we are going to switch back to someone very much in their comfort zone. This is a classic piece from Jack McMillan. I've seen him perform it 1,000 times and it never gets any less funny, any less impressive. This is a standout piece from the one and only Jack McMillan. This is Ladders.
I wish I had a ladder. You see, I wish I had a ladder, because if I had a ladder, I could reach the things I can't normally get to, like the tops of tall cupboards where everyone seems to keep their pasta. Have you ever met someone that hasn't kept their pasta there? And when I saw one guy once, and when I asked him where he kept his pasta, he said, I'm gluten-free. To To which I replied, I'm sorry to hear you have celiac disease, and that's when he said, no, I just read on the internet that it was healthy, and that's when it became apparent. This man has no fucking idea how gluten works in the body. Sorry. I wish I had a ladder. Wait, no, I wish I had a lot of ladders. A lot of ladders in a ladder collection. That way, when I got a new ladder, I'd be adding to my ladder collection. I would be a ladder adder. Adding ladders to a ladder collection, or a adding ladders to a ladder collection, and maybe if I get enough ladders, I could sellotape them together, build something high enough to grab your attention, to grasp at your affections, or maybe while I'm up there, I will look for directions, because Google Maps does not work well without Wi-Fi connections, and I spy with my little eye something beginning with L. Close. It's love. It's love. I'm not done. It's love. It's love. It's love. Because I fucking love ladders! You could say I'm a ladder addict or a ladder addict, adding ladders to my ladder collection, and maybe one day I go to one of my ladder addicts conventions and meet the girl of my dreams, someone who shares my interest in both ladder collection and ladder damage prevention. Because you need to look after your fucking ladders, because we come from Scotland, baby, where everyone's complaining because the weather's always rainy, and you would need to pay me to leave my ladders out in that rain, because ladders left in the rain will either rot or rust. And one day we be dirt and dust, so how about just the two of us? Go into that corner over there and we talk about ladders together. Or whatever, because maybe you don't like ladders like I do. Maybe you prefer chess. And I guess I can get into chess, but my playing style's a mess because I refuse to go any direction other than up and down like a ladder. Or maybe when we're talking, I discover you like walking, and I guess I can get into walking because walking is kind of like climbing a ladder. Except you don't use your hands, and the ladder's on the floor. And I would adore to try new things with you, explore the places you bring me to, and even if the things we do don't involve ladders, because ladders don't seem to matter when you're around. I think it's like how ladders near each other will just fall to the ground, whereas two ladders that push against each other creates a structure which is structurally sound. And one day, when we are old and we are frail, and we can only climb ladders that have ladder handrails, our children might find our ladders. Our ladders, as our ladders gather ladder dust in the attic, and they'll ask about the time that their father was a ladder addict, and they'll say, I wish I had a ladder. I wish I had a ladder like my father had a ladder, and my father was a ladder addict, ladders to a ladder collection, or maybe they won't like ladders. Or be able to say that fast at that age. Maybe they prefer chess like you, and I guess that's okay too, because between me and you, I love you twice as much as I love ladders. If it's a choice between you and ladders, I'll choose ladders never. So how about let's go climb ladders together, or whatever. Thank you.
And that was Jack McMillan with Ladders, a hilarious piece. Jack is such an excellent performer. We love having him on Loud Poets. Whenever we get the chance, he does so much. I know he runs In Deep with Sam Small. They're also the sort of brain trust behind Speculative Books, which is an amazing sort of organisation putting out spoken word pamphlets every month. It's like a subscription service. It's really, really cool. There'll be links below where you can go and check all of that out. And we actually have someone as a guest who was published by Speculative Books. It's almost like we planned it. But I'm so excited for today's guest. It's going to be really cool to chat to him about spoken word, but also all of his work as a comedian, a writer, a director, filmmaker, gamer, wrestling fan, all that stuff. I'm very excited to welcome to the Loudcast, Rab Florence. How's it going, Rab? How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm doing good. I'm surviving the pandemic. I'm still alive. So
it's always the thing. So many of these episodes have started off with like big positive intro, and then how are you doing? Oh, well, I'm trapped inside, so not great.
Yeah, no, I'm happy. I'm like, as long as I'm alive, I'm good.
Exactly right. It could always be worse.
That's not even a pandemic thing for me. That's just how I move through existence.
That's I don't know if that's the most pessimistic or optimistic outlook I've heard. That's have you been keeping busy during lockdown, managing to stay, doing stuff, or have you managed to avoid it?
No, I mean I've got two new baby twins, so they've been keeping us really busy. I've got 4 daughters in total, and 2 wee baby twins. So we would have been at home anyway. You know what I mean? So that's our attitude. And here, me and my wife were kind of like, we're quite pleased about the pandemic. You know what I mean? It means we don't have this FOMO situation. Like everybody's trapped at the same time as us. You know what I mean? So it's good. It
is a weird kind of like level setter thing where it's going, well, everyone's in the same horrible boat.
Yeah. So it's aye, but so I've been keeping busy with that, keeping busy with the kids, which has been nice. And still, still had a wee bit of work on. Been writing for doing a lot of writing, really, which is good for a writer. It's good to be forced to stare at the page and write.
It's supposed to be the thing we do. I often think that we end up more like I was talking to Imogen on the last episode of the Loudcast, and I was saying, are we like poets still, or are we more administrators who occasionally write poems? So it is nice to get to do creative writing. I'm glad you're getting the opportunity in lockdown. So it's amazing to have you on the show. I'm so glad. I imagine most people don't kind of. Most people will know you through your sort of film and TV work, and I don't know how many folk would be aware of your sort of poetry endeavours, because spoken word is sadly quite a small scene. So it's cool to have you on to pick your brain about it. And we sent you Jack's video a few days ago in sort of prep for this. Yeah. Jack, right? Because he did Spec Books. He's kind of behind the team there. Yeah. What did you think of Ladders?
I like the poem. It was interesting because I'm pretty sure that Jack performed that at the launch of my poetry book. I'm pretty sure when he went up and he did a bit of MCing at the start of that, and then he performed that poem. I'm pretty sure he did that one. Pretty sure it was that one. And it's
one of Jack's standout pieces. So yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, and it was really, it's interesting for me. Like it's interesting for me, that kind of spoken word poetry is always interesting because my background is in like kind of live comedy. And it's interesting to see just how close to live comedy that kind of stuff runs. You know what I mean? It's really fascinating to watch because quite a lot of the kind of live spoken word poetry that I see on the internet or I see live these days, it's kind of very almost like veering towards kind of comedic monologues a lot of the time. You know what I mean? It seems to be quite common that, and it's. It's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to do well. Jack does it well.
I think you're spot on that, like, obviously every country has its different kind of roots of, where their oral poetry comes from and stuff. And like, I think it's interesting that, in the sort of modern spoken word scene, especially in Glasgow, where like Jack is based and stuff, you get kind of two threads. You get people who are very inspired by like the hip hop scene and the kind of music scene. And there's a lyricism and kind of like beat to the poetry. And you also get people who, I guess, come from the more kind of punk poet tradition, right? Of like guys like Roger McGuff and John Cooper Clarke, Selena Godin, and folk like that, who it is rooted in that kind of like nonsense poetry or funny poetry or satirical. Like it's as opposed to maybe the North American scene, which is more rooted in kind of like social justice issues and like outlets for because it's rooted in black sort of oral storytelling traditions and stuff. It's I think Jack leans into both the kind of hip hop side and the comedy side of it.
And it's interesting as well because I did a fair amount of live performances in my poetry as well. Like I did poetry shows, to the confusion of my agent, would set up live poetry shows, and and they would sell quite well because I think people were just coming to see, well, there's a guy out of this show we like or whatever, and then they would turn up to hear poetry, and it was something I really tried to do, which was almost to try and make sure it wasn't a comedy show I was doing. Do you know what I mean? It was I kind of felt like, right, I'm reciting poetry here up on stage.
Yeah.
Even to the extent that I made the conscious decision to read from pages, to read the poetry. And I remember that was a conscious decision because ordinarily when I do live stuff, you memorise your routine. And I know a lot of spoken word poets are out there and they have their stuff memorised. They have their stuff memorised and rehearsed and blocked and all of that. And it was a very conscious decision of mine to be, no, I'm going to just go up with paper and read the poems to try and break away from that. And that was kind of before I was properly introduced to how spoken word poets were actually doing it, where they were kind of, where it was that more kind of performance based.
I think that's such a super interesting angle because it's almost the inverse of what most spoken word poets do. And like having read your book and kind of seen the work you do, that applies to kind of a lot of what you do, which is, because again, right, most poets are trying to, or performance poets, right, spoken word poets, are trying to show that they are as polished as like comedians and musicians and theatre productions, where it is, a entertaining performance that is memorized and delivered like it's spontaneous and all that stuff, whereas you've kind of went from a place where that's expected and went, oh no, I need to be more poetic. That's quite an interesting approach.
No, definitely. I think it's one of the things, you always feel a level of kind of inadequacy when you're in an area that's maybe outside your comfort zone a wee bit. And I think fundamentally poets and people who want to write poetry are writers. And, I just wonder if it's like, I wonder if it is that thing a wee bit. When I was doing poetry, I'll talk about, doing poetry in the first instance.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I was considering this yesterday. I was thinking, should I say this on a poetry podcast? Should I say this? But poetry is always, I always feel when I put poems out there, even still to this day, I've had my wee book published and I've performed poetry live a lot of times. But even still to this day, if I put a poem up somewhere or I put a poem on Instagram or something, there's a kind of inner cringe within me. There's almost like a hardwired, conditioned cringe within me from my background, I think, and from for a kind of working class background and coming up, and people would make jokes about the type of people that would write poetry. That's
100%.
just a thing, and it's weird that I kind of still feel that. And I think certainly when I was going on stage and performing the poetry, that was almost a response to that as well. I wasn't wanting to go on and, wink and say, "Oh, this isn't really poetry." I wanted to kind of go up and be quite bold and say, I am going to stand here and read you poems that I wrote, which almost felt like, it felt, without sounding like an arsehole here, it felt a wee bit subversive doing that, because I would have people coming in, and people who perform live love doing things that feel a wee bit subversive as well. I think it's the thing that kind of breaks the monotony of live performance. But there was people there to hear, like, jokes and comedy and character stuff, or the stuff I would do in TV, and then I would, sometimes be spending 10, 15 minutes doing quite heartfelt poetry and stuff, and all that always felt really quite exciting. But it was a definite conscious decision to kind of go, well, I'm not going to give them a kind of comedy performance. And that's when it was weird, when I started seeing so many spoken word poets who really had this very polished, almost, that they could fit into a stand-up night almost,
Totally.
Just definitely an interesting thing.
It's such a fascinating approach, because like I saw you when you performed with Sonic Youth, which is an amazing night. Everyone should go and check out Sonic Youth. They do incredible stuff. And you performed, it was at the Gilded Balloon Basement. It was an amazing show, obviously. And I was kind of expecting, because I hadn't at that point sort of read your book yet, like I was expecting, it'll be poetry, but it'll be like, a comedian's version of poetry, right? There'll be, humorous and that, and like there is a lot of humor in your book. You know what I mean? Like you're a funny writer. But I think something that is so nice is that, and what is, I think, a great tool of spoken word is that you can be funny and then almost like immediately poignant, and you can do that with stand-up comedy and stuff as well. But I think it's harder because you're trying to always elicit at the end of it a laugh, which is its own sort of pressure. Whereas you can provoke laughs early on in a poetry piece and then turn it and make it slightly more introspective or whatever. And like seeing your set was really impressive. I think it's also interesting because you were saying there you read, right, and tried to make it less like a set. But something else quite subversive you've done is in your book, Poetry and Swearing, Volume 1, which everyone should get from Speculative Books. There is your intros and your connecting pieces are in the book, which I've never really seen before, and it adds it because I've often worried, when you put spoken word or performance poetry that is minded for presentation onto the page, it loses some of that spontaneity and that live connection with the performer. And doing the way you've done the book adds all that back in, because you give context to each of the poems that might initially seem quite disparately connected. They suddenly become much more interwoven and part of what would be a set. Like is that because of the background in comedy and being that thing of going, okay, I need to make the the structured seems spontaneously delivered, or like is that where that comes from?
I think a little bit. I think there's a little bit of that, but definitely the way I approached, these were all written poems. This is the thing. It's like none of these things were really written to perform live. That was kind of after the fact that I decided I was going to read them, so that I was going to do live performances in them. But certainly when I was putting together the live show, I was trying to structure it almost like, I think one of the things I've learned from working in comedy is about earning laughs, and about how you kind of just batter people with jokes constantly. People get tired quick. As if you're making them laugh at all. But they tire quickly, and so you have to pace things and stuff. And, I kind of quite quickly learned that the power of performing a poem about, like, only seeing my daughter half the time, or I've written a poem about that, is a much more powerful poem if it follows, like, a funny poem about Bruce Lee or about Batman or something, because people are, in a certain frame of mind, and then they get hit with that. And that was a poem, definitely, that to the audiences I performed to, who were, I would say, predominantly, just guys and women who watched Burniston and watched the TV shows and stuff, and who would maybe have came to see my comedy stuff in the past. It was still predominantly that same audience. You wouldn't believe how many guys came up after the show to talk to me about that poem, because they were guys in a similar position who had divorces or separations, and knew only had shared custody of their kids. And sometimes I did that poem, and you could hear guys big inhalations and stuff like that. I really get strong reactions, and I think that's partly because as well it was hitting a kind of different audience. Quite a lot of the poetry stuff and the live performance poetry stuff I've been to see, the audiences are quite young, which is a good thing that the audiences are young. It's good to see so many young people engaging with that stuff. But I think maybe a lot at a time they don't, you're not getting the guys in who are like maybe like 40, 50-year-old guys who, have been through situations like that, and maybe haven't really been exposed to poetry in that way. So that was an interesting thing. I was kind of thinking to myself, man, this is magic. I've never had somebody come up and kind of open up to me after a comedy show before. You know what I mean? That doesn't happen.
It's super interesting. Obviously, I mean, it's funny because obviously Katie Ayles is the researcher for this show, and she was on the Sonic Youth gig that I saw you at. The poetry community is very small, and her research was all about like authenticity, and how there is a view from the audience that when you're doing poetry, it's like real, that it comes from you, and that it's definitely true. And not everyone does that, right? But it's kind of it's what's considered the status quo. And if you're not doing that, you kind of have to code that for the audience, right? It needs to be a character piece, or clearly not about you. And like I've found the same, when you do poetry, especially audiences who maybe haven't been to poetry before. We do fringe shows, and so you get people who have never kind of accessed it before, who just end up in your fringe show, and they are so confused by their own feelings about like poetry. And it goes back to what you were saying about like the cringe factor. And I don't know about yourself, but I hated poetry at high school. Hated it. I hated being taught it. I couldn't comprehend it. I was like, well, maybe the curtains are just blue, I mean, maybe it rhymed, and that's why they put it in. Like it just seemed so pretentious and inaccessible, whereas spoken word and like performance poetry is rooted in the kind of immediate, right? You need to understand the poem there and then. So if you're writing effectively for that kind of style, then like people are really affected by it. It's interesting as well because I think there's a through line where I see someone like yourself, and like you are a writer, director, poet. You wear all these hats, but like to select to go and do poetry when there is that cringe factor and when your audience aren't expecting it, or to like be into like openly into wrestling. And I get in trouble for trying to bring wrestling up all the time on this podcast, Rab, but you're here and there's a reason for it, so I get to do it for once.
Anybody that knows anything about the arts or about poetry or about entertainment or anything should be fascinated by wrestling. Wrestling is, it's a completely fascinating thing, which let's not talk about it on here. But
but like I think I've seen it in the poetry scene. There's this undercurrent of poets who I know who are like all poets, but also D&D fans, but also wrestlers. wrestling fans, but also way overly into film and TV production, like, because it's that need to just creatively outlet. I find it so fascinating that line is obviously there for you. What was the reaction from people, when you did put out the sort of poetry stuff and make that decision?
I mean, there was people who, I remember when I first started kind of promoting the shows on social media, and people would message me and say, "Is this actually a poetry show?" And I would be like, "Yeah, it's a poetry show. I'm going to be reading some of my poems." And then they'd be like, "I bet, is it really a poetry show? Is it?" They were thinking it was some kind of, it was going to be a comedy show about a guy doing poetry. You know what I mean? Some kind of anti-comedy thing. So there was a lot of people really quite surprised about it, and I really took some time out. It was a choice between doing like a stand-up thing, or doing the poetry. And I think it was just purely because I remember when I went to Glasgow Uni, and I'd always been a big reader, and I always loved to read, and I always loved to write. But poetry was just something, it was never something I disliked, but it was just something I hadn't really had a huge amount of exposure to, really. And then when I went to Glasgow Uni and I was doing English Lit there, and we had to buy this giant poetry book. It was like this big, thick poetry book as one of the, and I was like, oh, that's like a 30 quid poetry book I need to buy, this big mad thing. And it was just the best. It was just one of the best things I ever bought. I just couldn't believe it. It was completely jaw-dropping to me. I ended up working through like all of it, and just being so fascinated with how just how beautiful it all was, and a chance to kind of, and that's the thing, it's like, for me, I like to read poetry. I would never choose really to go, even though I perform it myself, I would never really choose necessarily to go and watch people perform poetry. I love to read it. Because I do think that the words are the star, you know what I mean, of the poetry. And I really, I don't know if it's a hugely positive thing to have. I don't want to say hugely positive. I don't know if it's always the best thing to have this persona up front and centre,
totally
presenting the poetry. It's a difficult thing though, because it's a tricky thing that spoken word poets have to deal with. I think is that, they have to hustle. They have to really hustle to make money. And to hustle to make money, you need to perform your poetry, and you need to perform it in as many places as possible. And I don't think it matters how honest or how truthful or how emotional your poem is, or how much you were bearing yourself when you originally wrote it. After you've performed it 20, 30 times in front of audiences that are having a drink, it's going to, even for you, lose some of its, I'm maybe romanticising this a wee bit here, but it's definitely going to lose some of its beauty, I think, once you've performed it that many times. And
oh, totally, I 100% agree with you. Like, because I come from like a performance background, right, like theatre, and so I never wrote for catharsis. Like, I wasn't like someone who was like, writing helps me process the things I'm going through. I got into poetry because I was like, oh, that's a really cool way to like write and direct and produce and just be like a one-man band sort of thing, and still do performance. And like, that has shifted, slowly. Like, there are some poems that I've written that are about personal things, or like just going over feelings that are like more mine that I don't want to share, and I don't do those poems because like it would kill them. Like you said, it is a weird thing to have the kind of constant push to do really like open, honest stuff that is usually based around trauma or like bad experience. And so like how did you find doing that, where like, because a lot of that book is for you very personal, and you're saying you in the first instance wrote it to be on the page, and there's a distance there, right? Like, to release something that's very personal, but you don't need to see the people read it. So was that a weird experience to kind of talk about those situations to like a room full of folk?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why I made a conscious decision to, I would perform these poems a certain amount of times, and then I would rest them. I didn't want to be the guy who, 3 years later, he's still doing that poem about only seeing his daughter half the time, despite the fact, and your life situations will have changed. And, my daughter's 14 now, and, the relationship is different, and I see her more than half the time. And so it's not really honest anymore. Do you know what I mean? So it's a snapshot of your life sometimes when you're doing this, this kind of more honest poetry. And even if you're talking about stuff in your past, I think how you look at that stuff presents differently as well. So I don't think you want to continue to, you can perform the funny stuff, as much as you like, because they're fundamentally just there to A, make people laugh, and B, try and convince people that you're much cleverer than you actually are. But I think as well that this is the danger as well with spoken word poetry, I think, is that it's very easy to just lean on what works and what works in a live setting, and sometimes what works in a live setting, and anything isn't necessarily what you should be doing. Do you know what I mean? It isn't necessarily what you should be continuing to perform or repeating, or it's a tricky one. It's like if you were doing comedy and you were going out in front of an audience and you were only performing the stuff that you knew the audience would definitely lap up and love, that's a dangerous road to go down. You know what I mean? And I think it's a dangerous road to go down even in poetry, because you would end up not so much about challenging your audience, but not really challenging yourself, I think.
I mean, you find that though, in any artistic profession, right? Someone hits on something that works, and so the temptation is to try and replicate that ad nauseum until, it's law of diminishing returns, isn't it? Like that, you see it in comedians that's, blow away the scene, and then slowly it just they become a parody of themselves. And you always, which is why I find your kind of approach and the sort of breadth of artistic outlet that you have super interesting, to be someone who, flits between like the gaming world and the wrestling world and the film and TV and comedy and poetry. Like, is that something that is then important to you, to not fall into a pattern of doing the same stuff?
Oh, definitely. I always there's two things I love doing, and I like doing stuff that I like to do stuff that I think, this is what I say to myself, I say, my enemies won't predict that I'll be doing this next. Right? I don't have any enemies, right? But I kind of visualise some kind of, like, an arch nemesis who's like, I know what he's going to be doing for the next 3 or 4 years, he's going to be doing this. You know what I mean? And I like to try and confound him with my choices. So that's one thing I like. And I also love starting from scratch. Like, I love starting from scratch and trying to do stuff that, even like putting stuff on the internet and it only gets like 100 views, and then you're just trying to build on that. I find something really, I don't know what it is, I just find something really exciting about that stuff. Even though it's not completely, because obviously when I was doing the live poetry, I had an audience that would pay to come and see it, so it's kind of cheating a wee bit. And it's why I was.
Well, I mean, if you've built up that audience, but you've still done the groundwork.
But it's still, it would have been amazing to kind of, to transform how I looked and just secretly done the poetry, and because you can never. I just kind of felt, whether this is right or wrong, but I just kind of felt that I could never properly be within the poetry scene, really, because I always felt like, well, that, it's no really, that he doesn't belong in the scene. But it just didn't feel like I would ever properly feel part of it, you know what I mean? And I would quite enviously actually look on at, how the scene actually was, you know what I mean? It was like, it looked cool, like all these people just writing this stuff and doing this kind of poetry, and going to Berlin to perform some stuff, and going here and there to perform some stuff. And knowing that would never be but it's nice to be sometimes it's nice to be like a visitor into the worlds as well, and just observe it, you know what I mean, and see it. So I mean,
it's totally valuable as well, I think, for anyone who's in a scene to try something different, like to pop into another kind of artistic sphere, because you learn so much. You see what you're doing right in yours, or what you could do better and things like that. Are there big differences for you that stand out as like, oh, this is so completely opposite to the way the comedy scene operates and things like that? Were there things that were a surprise to you?
I think one of the biggest surprises to me was that it seemed like, and I know I'm probably getting the wrong impression here, but it seemed like everybody was really supportive of each other. Now, I don't know, you might be able to tell me whether that's true or not, and I'm sure there is some poets on the scene here in Scotland who say negative things about other people on the scene, right? I'm sure there is that. But in that life, what is it like? Is it like that?
I think it's like any scene, right? You're going to have people who don't get on, who don't necessarily think fondly of each other. I think it's one of the more supportive creative scenes I've seen.
Well, that was the impression. The impression I got was that this was a supportive creative scene, but not only supportive in the sense that, you know, everybody was supporting each other in terms of performance, you know, there in the space on the night, but also I kind of thought that there is a sense of kind of a financial supportiveness as well, like a kind of, you know, a spreading the wealth a wee bit of, you know, funding for places and trying to keep people grafting away and working and gaining people a wee spot here and stuff like that. And it seemed like a really supportive scene in that sense as well.
I mean, it's easy to not worry about someone stealing your slice of the pie when there's no pie to start with, right? You know, you can. I know from my point of view, right? I run, you know, I Am Loud. We've got like this sort of team here that, you know, we put a lot of work into like putting on Loud Poets and stuff, and we obviously think the best way for us to grow is to like support other people. I'll always plug like Sonic Youth and Noiriki and In Deep and like all these other amazing spoken word nights, because if someone goes to that, they're more likely to seek out more stuff, right? And as long as you're doing something slightly different, then it all works out. You know, there's room for everyone. The point is to like grow the audience so that there's even more room for more people. So I think there is an element of that. And like some people, you know, are maybe less interested in doing it, or, you know, maybe there's people secretly bad-mouthing everything, you know, us behind our backs and stuff. It happens, but like for the most part, I think that the scene's pretty like supportive. And I have seen the opposite. You know, it is nice being at a poetry show and being like, people are gonna, you know, critique and like give feedback, but I've stood at the back of the stand when 10 Red's happening and like Red Raw even, and like you know, heard comedians slaughtering the new folk and just like. And I get it, it's a different scene with a different approach, and it's there's much more competition for you know, paid spots and, you know, spaces on TV shows and all that stuff. So I don't know if it's maybe just because it's less competitive.
But I don't think it's just that. I genuinely think a lot of people get into comedy for negative reasons. Like genuinely.
Oh really?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I don't think anybody gets into poetry. I mean, look, going back, the amount of people I've known over the years who like get into comedy because they're kind of resentful, or because, you know, because they want to make themselves more attractive, because they want fame, because they want money, because there's quite often a lot of negative. You know, it's very rarely in comedy.
None of those reasons apply to poetry, so that's good. Yeah.
Well, no, I genuinely think that there's very rarely people get into stand-up where they're kind of like, you know, it's just, you know, it's the love of the words, and I just want to kind of explore aspects of myself. And, you know, I don't think it is that. It's certainly when I get into writing, I always loved writing, and when I get into writing comedy, it was, you know, I had specific goals in mind. When I was young, I was really into, like, I loved Fry and Laurie, a bit of Fry and Laurie, the sketch show, and, you know, and I was like, I would just love to have a sketch show on telly one day. And I was very driven when I was younger, and because I was very driven to try and reach that goal, you know, you were negative about, and I don't mean in a massive way, but you were just kind of, anybody that was already in that position or was above you in the ladder, you were kind of dismissive of their work, and, you know, you were kind of like, they need to go, they need to move out the way and let me through and stuff like that. And I think that's a thing in the comedy scene that has always existed and probably does still exist, and that's what creates that energy in a live stand-up setting, and it's what creates that energy on a TV panel show. You hear a lot of people that work on these TV panel shows who eventually leave because they couldn't stand the kind of cutthroat nature of it, how kind of aggressive the kind of environment was. And
that's almost a perfect example, actually, because Mock the Week, right? That's the thing, is what's the one where you jump forward to the mic? Scenes, say what you see, or scenes we'd like to see. We do that at Loud Poets. like it's a similar thing. We throw up a prompt and you jump forward and do a poem, and it is the opposite. I have to I host and I'm just always like, someone jump forward, and they always do it in order. They go and then they wait for everyone else to go, and you're like, it could not be a more different dynamic.
Well, it's a more civil dynamic there, and I wrote for Mock the Week, and so I remember how how crazy that was, and how at that point when I was writing for it, certainly it was just incredibly competitive and soul destroying stuff, really, when you come right down to it. And so that was a big difference. I noticed. I was like, this is a lovely kind of supportive atmosphere here, and people seem genuinely nice, and people seem genuinely engaged with each other's work as well. And I don't doubt that some of these people had heard this work that that some of the poets were doing many times, but were still really supportive. But obviously, I'm not. There's negative elements that are the same as well. I think one of the things I would say about live performance poetry is that performance styles. There's a lot of similarity in a lot of people's performance styles, I think.
Yeah. People talk about it all the time, poetry voice, right? And there's different versions. Because I think it's funny because a lot of the Edinburgh scene a few years ago was very influenced because of sort of large international student base, was very influenced by the North American slam style, and then but then Glasgow through guys like Sam Small and Kevin Gilday and stuff becoming quite prominent. There's now a kind of similar lilt and tone to the performance, which if you hear enough of it becomes
Yeah, that was the weirdest thing. That was the thing that struck me the most. I think when I went to a few kind of live poetry shows, because if somebody said to me, "What is a live poetry show like?" I could go da 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 da. Yeah, what it's like, which was such an odd thing because certainly in the stand-up comedy scene you're doing everything you can to try and differentiate yourself from the guy that went on before. And it's, but people that
I
are
think
new
sometimes
to the
people
scene,
get too invested in the poetry, because you're a good example. In your book, your stuff is all in a pretty rigid meter, and often your poems are in a very similar meter. You know what I mean? But when I saw you perform it, you didn't read it like it was totally confined to the meter, right? You would. Sometimes to get the consistent rhythm, but then you would change certain lines or deliver certain lines off the meter, because range of performance, right, surely is the way forward.
I mean, I think it's the thing about reading it as well, is that you can take a dramatic pause when you're reading off the page, weirdly, which is much harder to take that dramatic pause when you're just up there reciting from memory, because it looks like, the audience has that moment of hesitation, or if they lost their place, or if they lost, whereas you can play about with how you perform the poem. You can even switch it up in the middle, how you perform it when you're reading it off the page. And actually, weirdly, I think reading it sometimes gives you a greater freedom as well.
That's interesting.
Because the audience are completely safe. The audience don't have to go, this person is doing a routine that they've memorized. The audience can just relax and be like, he's just reading out his book. This is a very casual night, and they can kind of really relax into it. And so I wonder, because I was kind of new to the performing poetry thing, I was thinking to myself, what is the reason for that? The way these poems are performed like this, is it almost like something that helps them memorize how it goes, or is it, I was just trying to work out there must be a meaning behind that, because I've spoken to all these people off stage and they don't speak like that. So there must be a meaning, or is it just, this is just what's in fashion just now? It's almost like a trend. It's like a thing.
I think that's part of it. I think a part of it as well is the big differences I sort of see between poetry and any other sort of scene I've seen has been, there's less resource to try different styles, right? When anyone starts, young comedians will all sound like the comedians they watched, right? The amount of guys that came up in the comedy scene, and if you go back and look at their early stuff, they all sound like Bill Hicks or whatever, right? Or pale imitations of. But then you start going to the clubs and stuff, you see such a range of comics that you eventually find your voice or your style, right? And then, but I don't think that's as available in the spoken word scene, so everyone gets the same like 2-3 people that they look up to and pattern their style off of. And if enough people do then that's just what the open mics sound like, and then people think, oh, I have to sound like that to get ahead. It's chicken and egg, I guess. But yeah, I think it's down to a lack of range of seeing other stuff or hearing other stuff.
But there is something almost kind of hypnotic about it in itself, though. You know, as I remember being at a show and when this had already been something I noticed, and there's something actually quite nice about that kind of sing-song style as well. Like once you've just accepted it, you know, and the third person has came on and they're doing that as well, it kind of you know what I mean. But you just kind of feel you're like,
totally.
You know, you can kind of go with it. You can kind of go with it, and you kind of think to yourself, maybe this is just how this is for now. You know what I mean? And it's, you know, it can be quite
part of
pleasing
it might
well.
as well be an attempt to add a kind of rhythm and lyricism into it, you know what I mean, like to make it more musical. Because it's funny when you're saying, you know, if you read no one thinks you can take the dramatic pause. That's the exact reason I like working with musicians, because it fills the empty spaces. You can have like a call and response where you can let that bar finish as a pause for you and then come back in, and like I find that fills out those spaces like really well.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing working with a musician. That's like, you know, I'd never even considered anything like that, but it is an interesting thing.
It freaks a lot of poets out. So when at our shows, we always have, so when you do the way our show works now is we do, you know, your sort of the second half is feature sets from everyone, and one of their poems is accompanied by like a long running musician who we used for years who improvises behind it. Right. And you can see when it's someone's first time, they're like terrified to go with it because they think it's going to throw off their whole rhythm.
Yeah.
And
or if you're a terrible control freak, surely you would be like,
oh yeah.
You know, I don't like that. I don't want to hear that. That's not how that should sound. Yet at this point, you know.
Whereas I'm the opposite way. Now I hear a bunch of my poems, if I don't have a guitarist with me, I'm like, that's rubbish. This is terrible. I'm not doing it. So it flips round. It's fascinating. I could pick your head about the poetry. I find it so interesting getting outside perspectives. You know, people who have kind of come in from a different background, a different experience, and that's a fascinating insight. Are you looking to do more poetry? Do you think it'll be something you continue with? Or are you still writing? Yeah,
definitely. I've still been writing poems. I started writing an epic poem, which is, you know, a ridiculous idea I had. I thought, I wonder if I could write a novel-length poem.
Nice.
And so I've started that, and I'm a fair way into that, and I don't know when that'll be finished.
That's cool.
But yeah, I'm still dabbling, and I definitely will at some point put another collection out without a doubt. Yeah, and I love doing it that way. You know, I like a poetry publisher putting out the poetry book and stuff. It's that thing about being in the right, you know, you want to be in the kind of right scene in the right world. I like that stuff. So I'll definitely do another collection, I think.
I think it's nice to see as well that becomes someone who's come in and contributed to the scene, right? Because like you do, like you said, you bring an audience, you bring people who will pick that up, and that helps a small, you know, independent Scottish spoken word publisher, which is maybe the most niche thing you could ever be. That helps them and grow it, rather than, you know, going, oh, I'm going to release some poems and doing it through a publisher and never, you know, interfacing or connecting in with the sort of grassroots scene. So it's nice to see it that way.
Cool. Yeah, no, and they, you know, and it was great to work with them as well. It was just great to know people that knew the scene, you know, and I just feel much more confident working with people like that. And you know, and the launch night for the book was just one of the best live nights I've ever been involved with. It was just great, a great atmosphere, great people there, great performers at it. It was just, you know, and it was a nice way to kind of see that scene working, you know. It didn't even really become about the book at that point. It was kind of just, you know, it was just nice to see all that stuff.
Well, I'm super glad it was a good experience for you coming in. It's not like, oh man, I've got horror stories to tell outside a poet voice, which, you know, that's it's whether you like it or not, I guess. But yeah, no, it's good to hear that you have a good experience in it. What else have you been working on, Rab? Because I know you know, like we've been talking about, you've got tons of hats that you wear, and obviously lockdown has been like preparation station for everyone, where it's, you know, everything's coming down the pipeline. So like what's been keeping you busy?
I've been writing. We've got a sitcom called The Scots, which had a pilot last year, and we got a series commissioned. And we were supposed. I mean, we should have filmed it back last summer,
Right.
but we've not had extra time to write it, so that's never a bad thing. So we should be filming that in May. We should be filming the series in May, all going well.
Nice.
So hopefully that works. So there'll be that. I have been, I'm working on a novel. Working on loads of stuff. Working on a novel. I'm going to make another film. I've been trying to get a film funded for years now.
Right.
It's very tough. It's very tough to find film funding. It's a very tricky road to go down. So I'm going to make another film, just ultra low budget, off my own back. I want to make a film. My daughter, who's 14, Hope, she's expressed an interest in acting and making films and stuff like that. So I thought, why don't we just make a film together? And I'll teach her how to edit and stuff like that. Like go through the whole process because I just think it would be, I would have loved my dad to do that for me when, my dad could have shown me how to go out and put sheets on a roof, how to do a bit of roofing, but I would have loved somebody to show me, how to do that stuff when I was young. So I think it would be great to do that.
It's great skills to have. Like one thing I always learned from sort of the art scene is knowing how to it's way more benefit if you're an actor. If you can also set up a camera and run some editing software and know how to deal with lights and stuff, you're going to have a much smoother time. Like knowing both sides of the fence.
Yeah.
The film, is this the Beneath the Black Pyramid? Is that the...
It is Beneath the Black Pyramid, yeah. That's
nice.
That's what it is, which I'm going to be in as well, which is, the first time I've done that. It's about a girl whose father becomes convinced that there's a black pyramid floating in the sky that is causing all the things, all the bad, negative stuff in his life to happen. And so it's a kind of horror film.
Nice.
So we're going to make that. We're going to make that towards the end of the year. So that'll be something. My second half of the year is nice and clear at the minute, so I've decided I'm just going to keep it clear and do this. And I think if anything, it'll be a great memory anyway for the two of us to have to deal with this.
100%. What a cool thing to do with your dad, right? Like, here's the movie we made.
If it's good at the end, it'll be a good memory. But if it's roundly humiliating, if people are absolutely humiliating us at the end, then it'll probably be less good a memory. Yeah. But no, I'm sure.
Let's hope she doesn't have to distance herself from the project.
Take my name off that, Dad, please.
That's excellent. Release the hope cut. That's what I say. Brilliant. Well, Rab, it's so lovely having you on, and I know you're going to stick about for a little bit, and we're going to have a bit more chat on the Loudcast Extra, which you guys can get over on our Patreon channel. Go and check it out. But I thought it'd be lovely to round off the show with a poem from yourself. Are you up for that?
I'm up for that, yeah.
Tremendous. What are you going to read for us?
Let me think. I'm going to read the one that I did quite recently, one that I wrote quite recently that I'm quite fond of, and I've got loads of daughters now. I've got loads of daughters, and I thought I was going to write. I wanted to write something about just my worries about the world, and my worries about fundamentally just men, basically, who I just don't like men. You know what I mean?
We're not a great
fundamentally
people,
I just don't like either of us, really, very much. And also I've always been fascinated with Sawney Bean, so I thought I would. So this poem's called Sawney Bean. Amazing. Quite long, by the way. It's not too long. I won't. So forgive me. Sawney Bean. I will hide here in a cave with my beloved and my children. I will tear each passer-by from limb to limb. Inside the cave we'll warm ourselves by fires that we started, without the aid of you or she or him. The sky at night will be aglow with stars forever falling, and who will even know what day begins? For all of me is this sweet cave my love and all my children, the blood of careless strangers on our chins. Call me Sawney Bean and let me live in here forever where the universe rotates around my heart. Let me lie here by my woman and my daughters. Leave us sleeping, while the world outside does tear itself apart. Tell, what do you expect of this poor father, lying weeping in his cave as horses gallop closely by, while chaos is approaching from the houses of our rulers and apocalyptic choices heat the sky, while the animals are dying, disappearing, never being, made extinct in just as quickly as a thought, and children on the beaches lying face down, never breathing, are photographed, politicized, forgot. Should I send each darling daughter off to sea into those waters, where every friendly face might be a storm, and leave them there to suffer on their own, dashed on the rocks, or keep them here beside me where it's warm? What madman would I be to tell my women that our children now must go off into hell to stand alone, to enter deadly combat with the devils spawned by others and the devils we can spawn all on our own? Should I tell her that the world expects we sacrifice our children to the madness of the rolling of a die? Should I tell her that the world might never hurt them? Should I lie so and expect her still to look me in the eye? We'd be safe inside our cave here, with our fires ever burning, and if anyone should find us, we shall strike. I will kill all of these men, and I will cut them into pieces, and my daughters will have any part they like. I will kill all of these men, all these abusers and these rulers. I will drag them from their horses in the night. I will strip them, chain them, lash them, leave them at my women's feet, and then look on as they savour every bite. I will kill and kill again, and I would kill these men forever if it meant my women lived a life at peace. But men will keep on coming, on their horses. Men keep coming. And so how can all this torment ever cease? The cave is buried deep within my soul. Inside I'm screaming that the world is where the monsters really live. If you've ever met a man upon the road and found a devil, then my murderous desires you must forgive. For I am no Sawney Bean. I will conform to all you're asking. I will send my children off into the night. I will kiss them on the cheek and tell them life is full of wonder, when in truth it is a long and bloody fight. I will die here in my cave without my women or my children. I will die alone the way that I was born. I will hear the sound of horses echo through these gloomy caverns. I will hear the trumpet of the hunting horn. And as death begins to eat me, I will have no expectation of some everlasting peace beyond the grave. For I'll wonder, always wonder, never sleeping, ever weeping, do my daughters still survive outside the cave?
Wow, that's amazing. What a piece.
Cheers,
It's so Raven-esque. Like there's the structure wise, like is very like Poe, the Raven, right?
That's a good laugh, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a good laugh.
What an amazing piece. It's interesting because I find Sawney Bean fascinating. I used to work at the Edinburgh Dungeon, and so I've played Sawney Bean a bunch.
Oh, yeah.
And like, so I did a lot of reading up on the story and stuff. It's what a terrifying, weirdly Scottish myth. Like when you look up Scottish myths, it's the top one you find, and it's grotesque. I know. But that's, what a stunning piece, Rab.
Cheers,
I love
buddy.
that.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing it with us. Guys, go and get Rab's book, like I said, from Speculative Books, Poetry and Swearing, Volume 1. Rab, where can people find more of your work?
Oh, just all over the place. I don't know.
Type Rab Florence into Google. You people should know this by now.
Just all over the place. But I look out for the Scots later in the year, hopefully. Sitcom. There's no poetry in it. But
There's a good. I think the pilot's not still up on the iPlayer, is it? But there's a good clip of looking through the photo album, which is very funny.
Yeah, no, there's. I mean, it pops up kind of here and there. The pilot, but the series is better than the pilot, I would say.
Cool. Well, we will do some sharing and stuff when things come out. So yeah, and there'll be links and descriptions to where you can go and follow Rab and all of his work down below, or come and chat to us, send us an email, and I'll send you a link, whatever it is. But for now,
I should say as well that all my 100% of my cut for the poetry book as well goes to Black Lives Matter. So please do buy if you can.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. Please do go and pick up the book. Get some awesome poetry. Support an amazing cause. Do good things. Rab, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm looking forward to chatting to you on the Loudcast Extra. But yeah, hit like, subscribe, all that good stuff, guys. And I will see you in the next episode. Rab, say goodbye.
Cheers, man. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, we'd appreciate it if you could hit the like button, if you could hit the subscribe button, and make sure to ring that bell icon so you don't miss any updates from us in the future. If you want to go that extra mile and support us a little further, we do have a Patreon channel with loads of exclusive goodies, and you can sign up for as little as $1 a month. We appreciate your help, guys, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.